Yeah. Um, what I thought I would talk about tonight or today, first of all, saying hi to everybody who happens to be out there waiting on us. We have had nothing but experiments on what programs work with, what, and how you can mess up. Anyway, what I wanted to talk about, what I wanted to talk about today was drywall. You know, drywall is in a number of situations, commercial, residential, including mobile home. And so what I wanted to talk to you about is, first of all, my history, my experience with it. My father was very capable, very multi-skilled, but he was a master electrician. Or when I was growing up, he was a very good journeyman, and later on became a master, who started his own business and everything else. So he was teaching me things like carpentry at an early age, how to use a handsaw, things like that. But he really wasn't teaching me about drywall. Later on, he got to be partners in a concrete business. We did commercial work. Again, that had nothing to do with drywall. So you might say, well, how do you know anything about drywall? This is where I'm going to tell you. I'll say about the time I was 19, I left home with my mom's tears in her eyes, thinking for sure something bad was going to happen to me. And I went to Austin, Texas. And there, I decided that I was going to work for a concrete company or a construction company that did bridges, sewers, curbs for big subdivisions and so on and so on. There's a company named Parker and Rogers. And I worked for them until it just didn't work any further. And I had been working off and on my grandmother's place after I got home with my uncle, who had always been trying to get me to come to work with him because he liked my work ethic, my willingness to do anything that I'm asked of, very polite, very energetic, not trying to dodge any responsibilities. If it was my fault, it was my fault. I was quick to take it and willing to work hard. So he took that little bit of knowledge working with me and experience with me, and whenever my job in the concrete business was going south because of the people, not because of me, the people in charge of me directly. It's a very good experience, but it was time to move on. And I took him up on the offer, said, okay, I'll come to work with you. We actually rode together, and he was foreman of probably 40 or 50 guys on a commercial job at three-story buildings in Austin. And that would be about, I want to say 81. And the first thing that they put me on was by myself. Here's a pair of snips. And do you have your other tools? Tape measure, pencil, knife, pouches, and these snips. I said, yes, sir, I do. So, okay, come with me. I'm going to go up to the second floor of this other building where nobody's at. And there's this great big bundle, big bundle, big, like 4 foot high, 5 foot high, and 5 foot across bundle of metal studs, probably 10 foot long. And I'm going to have you cut these up into this long. You measure it, and you cut it. This is where you cut it. This is how you cut it, and you'll get better and better with it. And when you see you do one, I did one. Oh, you got to do it this way, and then you go this cut here. So I started out with metal stud, and I cut the whole great big bundle, which is a big old stack of metal stud by myself. Took my break, came in, said, hey, it's break time, 9:30. Started at 7. And went back up there and did it again, and I probably didn't finish till about 2 o'clock, which we knocked off at 3:30. 30-minute lunch, and 3:30 we go home. But I finished about 2, and they was like, oh, hey, you did good. We thought you were going to give up. What they didn't know is I'd used both hands, got my right hand sore and starting to cramp up, got to my left hand. But I cut the whole bundle up, went back to my right hand, cut it all up, and it was good. They gave me a crash course on how to cut metal studs. What does that have to do with drywall? Well, we started doing metal stud, then we did commercial drywall. Now, in commercial drywall, you don't lay the drywall down, and it usually is type X and 5/8. 5/8 thick, not ½ inch like you would see in a house. So here I am carrying really awkwardly, didn't know how to carry drywall at all. And I was with this guy who was shorter than me and temperamental, going through a world of drama in his own home. And so I worked with him. Now I was 6'2", and he probably was 5'7". Really, really hot-headed, red-headed guy. But he liked me because, I had the work ethic to do whatever. I had to learn how to use a screw gun, which I didn't. Going from concrete work and doing electrical work, I didn't have any knowledge. So here I am, learning how to use a screw gun and screws. Clumsy as all get out, just clumsy. So my uncle said, hey, if you want to get good, take home a box of these screws and drop them into a pan. So I sat there in my chair at my grandmother's place, which I really didn't stay there much. I slept outside in a shed and later on in a camper. Not because she didn't want me there. Later on she wanted me there. But I was trying to be on my own. So I would sit in there in her chair where I had a chair, and I could just spin these screws into my fingers and then get it to the right point and drop it. Spin it, drop it, spin it, drop it, spin it, drop it. So it took days of me going on after working all day with it. I learned how to get drywall screws spinned up in my fingers pretty quick, my left hand. And later on I did framing screws, which you use to put the metal stud into the metal track. That was my first and clumsy start into drywall. We didn't use routers. That came on later, say 10 years later. Everybody was cutting everything by hand. So you cut it around metal boxes, and you cut around the edge of that lip of that metal box. And you might cut it where it's right up on the edge of that opening, but you would cut inward at an angle, and then you cut and you clean it up, and then you got to measure it right, or it won't go on there. Which these guys were really good at what they were doing, and didn't make many mistakes. And then you start off with you're standing up the sheets, not laying it down, and you screw it off on the bottom where they go up against. Then the guy on your journeyman generally pushes the drywall to the left, bumps it up against the other one, and you put your screw where they bump up about 4 feet, 5 feet, and then you go down to the right-hand corner and you screw off the bottom. So you're like a triangle. You start at the bottom, go up, and then screw over here. And then you hope to get as many screws as possible in that sheet before he brings the next one. So again, over and over, hanging drywall and cutting the drywall to fit. And then if it's off a little bit, you just carve at it. So this was a big, wide open world for me. I didn't know very much about it, but here I was getting a crash course. I mean, I was pushing on the screw gun so hard that several times when I missed the stud, I pushed the screw gun nose through the 5/8 drywall. And they said, hey, you don't got to push that hard. I didn't know. I thought everything you worked hard at it. So I learned later on to be very quick. So I went through all types of soffit, fascia, framing, hanging, and commercial. Got into where we're doing, instead of just acoustical ceilings, they actually make an acoustical grid that you hang drywall on. I did that. I worked on high-rises, and I did core board, if you know what that is. That is 1.25 inches thick by 16 inches wide board that could usually be 12 foot, but you put it in between H studs, and that goes around your elevator shafts. And I could go on about my experiences with that. It is elaborate, and it has its own rules as far as making sure all joints are covered with metal and then later on sealed up from the outside, so that no fire is going to get through for at least an hour to 2 hours. Sometimes they say 5 hours, but it's meant to hold up to a whirlwind of fire on the outside. If it ever gets inside, it stays inside. I also did a lot of Rayco systems, which was a brand. That is where you didn't have to finish any drywall. It had the wallpaper already on it, commercial grade wallpaper wrapped, and it had a aluminum escutcheon. You put your metal stud in, and it had a gap on both sides so you can slide the drywall up inside of it. And in theory, with these clips that you would put on the back side of them, you would not see anything screw-wise to give you any idea how that's held up. And there's no drywall finishing at all. Of course, mind you, I hadn't been doing any drywall finishing, just a hanging, and it was rough at it. So we got into core board, which really needed somebody who cut very well, and eventually I got very good at that. A lot of walls that were 3 and 4 layers. I did a lot of exterior board on high-rise buildings and single-story buildings. All that drywall generally cuts the same. You cut through that paper, and then it will break, and then you cut the backside. It is fragile. With the exterior board, quite often we did a lot of rounded corners. That was the thing back then. We would wet those boards down so they would shape to it. It's pretty interesting to watch drywall bend and then fasten it. I ended up doing a lot of that for other people. Everybody got real fascinated with staircases that had rounded walls around it, and then I ended up doing a lot of, later on in my career, I did a lot of arched ceilings, and did a lot of that with quarter-inch drywall. And so I had a crash course in all the different kinds of commercial drywall. That was where I got my first experience being a foreman at age 19. Maybe it was almost 20. It wasn't because I was really qualified. It was because my only qualification that was of any use to them is I showed up every day. Whereas everybody else was late or might not show up at all. You never could depend on them. But we can count on this guy. Here's what we want you to do. Just take it over. So what I did was say, hey, I know I don't know as much as you, but you know a lot about this. How about you do this section? Or you advise me what we need to do. And sometimes these guys would give me a little bit of lip, but they would generally help out because of my humility. So now, I've done all kinds of elaborate drywall in Austin area before I moved over into East Texas. And he's digging in the wall. Yeah. I ended up working on a grocery store with a gentleman there. And then I also went back to working with my father doing electrical work. And later on, I did a lot of foreman level electrical work on grocery stores, mainly Safeway. And then went back to drywall. There's a lot of story in between. Probably a year and a half, 2 years later, I was back doing drywall and commercial drywall. I did that for quite a while end up being a foreman in hospitals. I did a lot of hospital work, a lot of oncology centers there for a while. But because of my qualifications in all the paperwork that I had set up on how to do things to be inspected at 40% and 80%, I think they got rid of the 40% now. I ended up doing a lot of really elaborate operating rooms, and where you had to wear booties and full suits and masks and everything, so they didn't want you to get any kind of foreign things in that operating area, even though we were making dust. And by the way, I worked on metal stud, elaborate metal stud in Orlando, working on MGM. I worked on Splash Mountain in Epcot. I worked at Universal Studios when it first started. And I did a lot of exterior drywall there for the facades. I ended up being a foreman in that town, and I could go on and on without trying to be a braggart. But I did a lot of really elaborate sound stages and facades. The King Kong facade, the Pennsylvania Station facade, the Paramount Theater facade. I could go on. But I got a lot of experience in doing elaborate metal stud and drywall. But I also did a lot of drywall on houses in the afternoon. Say we would knock off at 3:30, and all of the guys, hey man, you want to go hang in the house with us? We'd go make some extra money hanging houses. Well, along the way, they said, hey, do you know how to finish? I'm like, no, I don't know the first thing. I've seen guys use the finishing tools, but I don't know the first thing about it. Actually, hanging houses is quite different. You're using half-inch drywall. You're using long 12-foot sheets. You're laying everything down. It's very different. So when somebody goes from hanging drywall in a house to hanging on a commercial site, they usually try to bluff you into saying, hey, I'll do hanging more drywall than anybody you got. Is they assume that because they are pretty quick in housing, that they're going to be very quick in commercial where it's wide open. It's a bad assumption, because the quality that you're required to use and the weight of the material and the thickness of the material, it's not the same game. But I did a lot of residential houses. My reasoning was, well, if I'm working, it's kind of hard to spend money. So I actually literally could save money by working instead of spending. So I would work hanging houses all along. And when I got to the Orlando area, it wasn't any different. Now, before I left Florida, I went back to Ocala area and was a foreman there. So whenever I finish up my job, they would say, hey, we need you to go to this other job, because they didn't want to lose me to some other company. Because I learned early on not to be loyal to them, because they weren't loyal to me. They just ended up handing me 2 checks. Hey, see you later. We're laying everybody off. So believe me, that I learned that commercial business, or just business, and generally is not loyal to you. So they did not want to lose me because of my attitude. I'm not going to sit home and wait for them to call me. I'm going to work somewhere. So I was working as a foreman in the commercial electrical, and as a foreman for multiple companies, including a general contractor for a while, rebuilding banks, lobbies, and things like that. So I got a chance. They said, hey, go over here and do some drywall finishing. I don't have a drywall finish. Yeah, well, you're going to learn. Just go over there, and we'll pay you the same wages you've been getting paid as a foreman, but you're going to drywall finish. Because they just didn't want me to go anywhere. Because they knew I would if they sent me home. I would be working the next day. So I went over there, and of course these guys did not want to teach me anything. I'm not going to teach you. You'd be trying to take my job. They were really bad teachers, generally. But I paid attention, and I put my hands to it, and I got it all over me. Did everything wrong. Of course, they told me about it, but I got better and better and better. And as time passed, that helped me as a foreman because now I knew what to expect with drywall finishers, what they can do, what they should do, how much mud they're going to use, what layer of quality I should be expecting from each individual. And believe me, drywall finishers are the biggest whiners ever, complainers, big time. They got a different name for that. Now, as a foreman now, if somebody said you can't do it, then I would literally put on the tools and do it. So now I'm not only doing drywall at these houses, I'm hanging drywall and then finishing. And guess what? Texture too. I started doing texture. And I was like really fascinated with the textures in Florida because there was a lot of hand textures. Commercial, they didn't want to do any texture. If they could, they would do no texture at all, which means very, very, very good finishing. Okay. Orange peel hides a lot. And all your hand textures on the ceiling, the popcorn on the ceiling, that all hides a lot of sins. You can get away with sloppy finishing. That is something that I learned also. Along the way, I picked up some habits from a few of the guys and put it together myself so that I don't finish with just a regular six and go do one side of all the butts, one side of all the angles. I'd put on with the six and pull off with an 8 so I can do both sides of the angles, both sides of the butts. That way I'm ready for whenever that dries for the next coat. I don't have to. What you generally would do is go do one side of all your angles in the corners, in the ceiling, and then you come back the next day and then you do all the others. Well, I would do the whole room, come out, butts, flats, angles, nails, laid on the second coat, and I would finish a room at a time. And it seemed like I was slower till these guys because they were only doing one side of the butt and one side of the angle. But I picked up from this couple of old timers what they did. Not many of them did, but what they did. And I said, man, that's cool as all get out. So that's what I do. I finish both sides of the angle, both sides of the butt, and it takes even more skill to do that. The hand textures are really neat. There's crow's foot, sunburst, Spanish lace, popcorn, orange peel, on and on. There's a lot of different ways to make. There's sponge finishes, heavy knockdowns, knockdown orange peel. And I also ended up picking up plaster, but that's enough. I'm not going to spend all that. I never, ever drew unemployment. I filed for it in Orlando, and I actually got a job before I even got the first check. So I didn't ever get any unemployment. So I also learned how to do plaster, which it seems kind of off the character or off the subject to talk about plaster, but in the 40s and 50s they used a type of drywall with holes in it to replace the lab, the little wood strips that you put the plaster on. And also the same guys who did metal stud and drywall did lab, which later on became, say, in the